Imagine a group of celestial beings endowed with unimaginable power, defying the Creator's laws and descending to earth to fulfill their forbidden desires. Their actions brought knowledge, but also spread destruction, corruption, and suffering. What led these angels, perfect in their creation, to fall so deeply? And what were the consequences for humanity and creation itself? Do you believe that their rebellion still leaves its mark on our world? Or has divine judgment already purified everything? Get ready to dive into the secrets of the Book of Enoch and discover how these stories challenge everything we know about good, evil, and eternal destiny. Today, we're going to explore Enoch's journey and the revelations he received, starting with his heavenly vision. This is where it all begins. Enoch, a righteous man in the midst of chaotic times, had his routine changed in an unexpected way. One day, while walking in silence, he noticed an intense light that seemed to come from the sky. Before he could react, two brilliant-looking celestial beings appeared before him. The sight left him speechless, while an inexplicable peace took over his surroundings. These beings were like nothing Enoch had ever seen. Their clothes shone like the purest gold, and their voices echoed like melodies that touched the heart. Without delay, they explained that Enoch had been chosen for a unique mission. Fear and curiosity began to take over his mind. Without knowing exactly how Enoch was taken beyond the clouds, his vision reached places he had never imagined existed, while heavenly beings guided him along unknown paths. When he reached a shining place, he realized that he was facing something great, something that went far beyond what humans could comprehend. There, in the heart of heaven, profound mysteries began to be revealed. The shining angels spoke about the balance that sustains all of creation and about the dangers of disobedience. Enoch, his mind already full of questions, began to understand that his journey would not be simple. He carried a greater purpose. During this experience, Enoch couldn't shake one feeling. This wasn't just about him. It was as if a universal truth was being revealed in a particular way. Heaven was closer than he had imagined, and he was part of something eternal. But why him? This question echoed in his mind. With each step, Enoch learned more about the role of angels and their connection to humanity. The heavenly beings spoke of choices, of a free will that both men and angels possess. However, not everyone used this gift wisely. What was to come would put everything he believed into the test. Before we continue on this fascinating journey, I want to ask you a special favor. If you're enjoying this story and want to continue learning about the mysteries revealed in the Book of Enoch, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss a single detail of this narrative, and you'll help us bring this knowledge to more people. Leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear these truths. Among the revelations were words about a rebellion. Some angels, endowed with power and knowledge, had deviated from the divine purpose. This awakened a new mystery in Enoch's heart. If angels, so perfect, could fail, what did that mean for humanity? He knew the answers would come soon. Enoch was led to a place of indescribable light, where time seemed to stand still. There, the mysteries began to be revealed in greater depth. Every word he heard seemed like a key to something greater, but not all keys led to immediate answers. What was unfolding was a celestial puzzle. The angels finally made it clear that this was just the introduction to something much bigger. Enoch, although dazzled, felt a growing weight. He knew that what he was about to learn would change his outlook forever. He was being prepared for something that involved not only his life, but the future of humanity. With these revelations, Enoch began to realize that the world he lived in hid deep secrets. Heaven and earth were connected in ways he had never imagined. However, what he saw at that moment was only the beginning. As Enoch absorbed every word from the heavenly beings, something in their tone changed. There was a heaviness in the air, as if a dark mystery was about to be revealed. They took him to a different view, where the earth seemed troubled as if a shadow had fallen over the world. The scene was unsettling, and Enoch began to realize that something terrible had happened. The angels explained that, once upon a time, a group of celestial beings had made a choice that had shaken the divine harmony. Although endowed with wisdom and power, these angels allowed themselves to be carried away by a forbidden desire. Enoch listened attentively, trying to understand what could have led these creatures to abandon their purpose. Cautiously, the angels described the beginning of the rebellion. One of them, Semjaza, with persuasive words, gathered others in his class, convincing them that they could live among humans. Semjaza's words were so seductive that 200 of them decided to follow his lead. Enoch felt a chill run down his spine when he heard that this decision had not been made impulsively, but had been sealed with a pact. This pact was signed on Mount Hermon, a place of eerie silence. There, each of the angels swore not to turn back. Heaven became more distant for them, and their ambitions led them to abandon heavenly glories for what they thought was freedom. What seemed like a bold choice quickly began to show its consequences. When the angels touched the ground on earth, the impact wasn't just physical. Nature itself seemed to shudder at their presence. Their actions, at first seen as grandiose, soon began to distort the natural balance. They took human wives, crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. From these unions, something new was born. Beings that belonged neither to heaven nor earth began to emerge. Giants, endowed with enormous strength and insatiable hunger, began to walk among men. Enoch listened, perplexed, as the angels explained that these giants not only consumed resources, but also brought destruction and chaos. What disturbed Enoch most was the revelation that these angels not only disobeyed, but also brought with them the knowledge that men were not ready to receive. They taught metal manipulation, astrology, and even witchcraft practices. Skills that, instead of bringing progress, spread corruption. Each detail seemed darker than the last. Enoch felt that the world was deteriorating, one step at a time. What men saw as progress was actually taking them further and further away from divine truth. The imbalance was everywhere, and the price would be higher than anyone could imagine. As the angels spoke, Enoch began to realize that the chaos he saw was not just the result of human actions. The fallen angels had planted seeds of destruction, which were now spreading like poison. He didn't know how far it would go, but he sensed that the consequences would be devastating. Enoch reflected deeply on everything he had learned. As he watched the visions that the heavenly angels showed him, he felt a tightening in his heart as he saw the depth of the corruption that the fallen angels had brought to humanity. These beings, once guardians of heaven, had passed on knowledge to men that they were not prepared to receive. Among the revelations, Enoch discovered that the angels had taught men how to manipulate metals, creating weapons of war. This led to conflicts and bloodshed on a scale never seen before. The text of Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 seemed to echo the words of the angels. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was multiplied upon the earth. As well as weapons, the fallen angels brought with them occult knowledge, such as astrology and witchcraft, practices that diverted man from worshipping the Creator and led him into spiritual darkness. The impact of this knowledge went far beyond what men could control, poisoning their souls and their relationship with God. Enoch listened carefully as the angels described how these teachings triggered a race for power and wealth. Human ambition grew to alarming levels, leading to the exploitation of God's creation for destructive ends. The text from Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20 seemed to illustrate this decadence well. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who make darkness light and light darkness. The giants, the fruit of forbidden unions, also became part of this tragedy. These beings, with unconscionable strength, began to consume everything around them, from crops to animals, and finally, people. The earth groaned under the weight of its corruption, and the words of Romans chapter 8 verse 22 made even more sense. For we know that the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. Enoch, with a heavy heart, understood that humanity was paying a very high price for the knowledge it had received. The unbridled quest for power and control was eroding everything that was pure and beautiful. The light of truth seemed far away, and the darkness of ignorance was taking over every corner of the earth. Even so, the fallen angels did not stop their deeds. They continued to influence men, encouraging practices that led them further away from the Creator. The dominion of sin seemed absolute, and the words of Jude chapter 1 verse 6 echoed Enoch's visions. And the angels who did not keep their original state, but left their own abode, he has kept in everlasting prisons. As the heavenly angels shared these truths, Enoch felt the urgency of his mission grow. He needed to fully understand the effects of this forbidden knowledge so that he could convey the divine warnings to the world. Time seemed to be running out on humanity, and the consequences were drawing ever closer. The revelation that man, through his disobedience, was collaborating with the corruption brought about by the fallen angels made Enoch even more worried. The earth was plunged into darkness, but there was hope. He knew that the Creator had not abandoned the world and that a divine intervention was about to take place. Enoch realized that what he had seen so far was only part of a much bigger story. The journey to understand humanity's destiny had only just begun, and the answers were still beyond his vision. The earth was devastated. The giants, the fruit of the union between fallen angels and human women, were consuming everything around them with an insatiable voracity. Their actions were not limited to destroying crops and animals. They began to turn their fury against men themselves, spreading terror and chaos. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 describes, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men." These creatures not only caused physical destruction, but also spiritually contaminated the world around them. Every step they took seemed to further deepen the corruption in God's creation. The peace that once existed was rapidly being replaced by fear, and humanity was completely dominated by this new reality. Enoch, in his visions, could see how people tried to resist, but their strength was insignificant in the face of the power and size of the giants. Natural resources began to run out, and survival became an almost impossible challenge. The text from Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 22 seemed to describe this moment. "They are wise to do evil, but to do good they know nothing." The impact of the giants' actions was beyond anyone's imagination. When human resources ran out, they turned their attention to animals. Entire species began to disappear, while the earth, which had been created in perfect harmony, now groaned under the weight of this destruction. Romans chapter 8 verse 22 said, "For we know that the whole creation groans." The fallen angels, who had started this cycle of corruption, were watching the results of their actions. What had once been a desire for freedom now seemed like a curse that they themselves had created. But even so, they didn't back down. They continued to encourage violence and imbalance, as if they were incapable of recognizing the gravity of their actions. Enoch felt the weight of it all as the heavenly angels shared their visions with him. The earth was unrecognizable, and human suffering was palpable. People cried out for help, but their cries seemed to echo in the void. The silence of the heavens was disturbing, and hopelessness was beginning to take hold of humanity. The giants' behavior also became increasingly irrational. As well as destroying what they found, they began to fight each other. What was left of human civilization was often crushed in the midst of these clashes, as if chaos was the only language these creatures understood. The visions revealed to Enoch that this destruction was no accident. It was the direct result of the choices made by the fallen angels. The world that once reflected divine glory was now a mirror of disobedience and pride. Enoch could not ignore how deep the connection was between the acts of these angels and the current condition of humanity. But the weight of these revelations came not only from what he saw, but from what he felt. The anguish of the earth seemed to invade his very spirit, as if he carried with him the lament of all creation. He knew that something had to be done, but what was still unclear. As Enoch stood before the visions, he heard a cry that seemed to echo from every corner of the earth. It was as if the planet itself was crying out for justice. The actions of the fallen angels and their descendants had created such an imbalance that even the heavens seemed to realize the weight of this corruption. Genesis chapter 4 verse 10 echoed in Enoch's heart. "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the tent." The sufferings of humanity were impossible to ignore. Men and women tried in vain to escape destruction. Families were torn apart, entire villages devastated, and nature, once a blessing, had now become a source of terror. The devastation seemed to have no end, and the sky remained silent in the face of the chaos. It was in this context that Enoch saw imposing celestial figures moving towards God's throne. The archangels Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel appeared before the Most High, interceding for humanity. They cried out for divine intervention, bringing with them the tears of the earth and the cries of the people. Daniel chapter 10 verse 13 mentioned Michael as one of the first princes, and now he was leading this heavenly plea. The archangels presented the state of the world to God, telling how the fallen angels had destroyed everything that was pure and good. They spoke about rebellion, the covenant on Mount Hermon, and the giants who were consuming the earth. Every word seemed to weigh on the heavenly atmosphere, while Enoch watched, amazed and terrified at the same time. The Creator heard the cry and responded with a decree that would shake the heavens and the earth. God's silence was not indifference, but patience for justice to be done. Now the sentence was being pronounced, and the angels who had rebelled would finally be confronted for their actions. Jude chapter 1 verse 15 seemed to give voice to the judgment. It is fitting to execute judgment on all and to convict the wicked. Enoch saw the archangels receive their instructions. They had a clear mission: to arrest the fallen angels and restore order to creation. Each of them was assigned a specific task, and their descent to earth would mark the beginning of the purification of the world. It was a time of action, but also of pain, for the judgment would be relentless. As the archangels left, Enoch felt a mixture of relief and fear. He knew that divine intervention was necessary, but what would come next would be devastating. Heavenly justice made no concessions, and the earth would face the consequences of centuries of rebellion and corruption. The weight of judgment was unavoidable. The visions showed humanity in despair, trying to understand what was happening. The righteous cried out for deliverance, while the wicked began to fear what was to come. The giants, so powerful and arrogant, realized that their dominance was coming to an end. The world seemed trapped in a tension impossible to describe. Enoch watched all this with a heavy heart. He knew he was facing a crucial moment in the history of the universe. Justice was on its way, but the suffering that would accompany this process would be immense. The archangels were ready to carry out their orders, and the earth was awaiting what seemed to be the beginning of its renewal. The visions continued, and Enoch was brought to a crucial moment. He saw the archangels Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel descending to earth, each with a specific mission. The judgment of the fallen angels had begun, and the Creator, in his infinite justice, had commanded that the earth be purified. The words of Psalms chapter 7 verse 11 resounded, "God is a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation every day." Michael, as leader of the heavenly hosts, was given the task of arresting Semjaza and the angels who took part in the covenant on Mount Hermon. With heavenly chains, he chained them in dark abysses, where they would await the final judgment. The rebellion they had begun now condemned them, and their once haughty voices became cries of despair. Raphael was tasked with dealing with Azazel, another of the rebellion's leaders. This angel, who had taught men how to manipulate metals and make weapons, was responsible for much of the destruction. Raphael cast him into an inhospitable desert and covered his face with darkness, as described in Isaiah chapter 13 verse 11. "I will punish the world for its wickedness, and the wicked for their iniquity." Meanwhile, Uriel was sent to warn Noah. He was to prepare for an event that would change the course of history. The Creator planned to bring a flood to cleanse the earth of its corruption. Genesis chapter 6 verse 13 describes, "And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is full of violence. Enoch saw Noah's expression when he received the instructions. He was a righteous man in the midst of a completely corrupted generation, and his heart was heavy with the responsibility of preserving life. The ark he was to build would be a symbol of divine grace in the midst of impending judgment, but also a testimony to what disobedience had caused. While Noah worked, the angels continued to purify the earth. Gabriel was ordered to destroy the giants, the fruits of the forbidden union between angels and humans. These creatures, who had spread terror and destruction, had no place in the plan of restoration. The text of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, described the impact of these beings. And we were like locusts in our own eyes. Enoch, in his visions, realized that this process was not just a punishment, but also an act of mercy. God was removing corruption to restore harmony to his creation. However, the suffering of the righteous during this period was evident. They cried out for deliverance as they witnessed the events transforming the earth. The archangels carried out their tasks with precision, but the judgment was relentless. Each act of disobedience by the fallen angels resulted in consequences that reverberated throughout creation. The purification of the earth was inevitable, but the process was painful for everyone involved. The weight of rebellion was now evident to heaven and earth. Enoch, observing all this, understood the gravity of the moment. The destruction was not the end, but the beginning of a new opportunity for humanity. He knew that what was happening at that moment would echo for generations, and his mission to record these revelations became even more urgent. If this story moves you as much as it did me, be sure to support our work. Subscribe to our channel and leave a like. This helps us to keep bringing you narratives like this one, which unravel the deepest and most intriguing mysteries in history. And of course, share it with someone who also needs to reflect on these powerful revelations. Now let's get on with the story. Enoch, immersed in the visions, was surprised by an unexpected request. The fallen angels, now imprisoned, sought his help. Their voices, once full of arrogance, were filled with despair. They begged Enoch to intercede with the Creator on their behalf, asking for forgiveness and clemency. It was a striking contrast to the pride they had shown in leaving heaven. The request was passed on to the heavenly angels who accompanied Enoch, and he was appointed as mediator. Even knowing the seriousness of the fallen angels' actions, he accepted the mission with a mixture of reverence and responsibility. The journey to bring the petition to the divine throne would be yet another chapter in his extraordinary journey. As he presented the request, Enoch felt the weight of the moment. He knew that the fallen angels had made irreparable mistakes, but he also recognized the depth of their anguish. Every word he uttered seemed to reverberate in eternity, and the answer would be definitive, not just for the fallen angels, but for all of creation. The Creator heard the petition, but the answer came with implacable clarity. There would be no forgiveness. The angels had chosen to rebel against the divine purpose, and their actions had eternal consequences. They were condemned to remain imprisoned until the day of the final judgment, when they would receive the definitive sentence. Enoch returned with the answer, and the despair of the fallen angels was evident. Their cries echoed through the abysses where they were confined, while the certainty of their eternal punishment consumed them. It was the end of any hope for them, and the beginning of a dark silence in their prisons. Enoch felt an immense weight when he heard the fallen angels' plea. As much as their voices were full of despair, he knew the gravity of their actions. Each step towards presenting the petition was a mixture of compassion and the certainty that divine justice could not be ignored. He wondered whether his own position between these two worlds was a burden or a privilege. Meanwhile, Enoch reflected on the meaning of this decision. He understood that divine justice was absolute, but he also realized the impact this would have on the future of creation. The world needed to move on, free from the influence of these angels, but the memory of their actions would remain as a warning to future generations. The visions showed the continuing purification of the earth. The work of the archangels continued steadily, removing the last vestiges of the corruption that had been spread. creation was beginning to breathe again, although there was still much to be restored. Each step in Enoch's journey seemed to reveal a new layer of meaning. Even with the judgment of the angels completed, Enoch knew that his mission was far from over. He felt that there was still more to learn, more to record, more to understand. The visions that accompanied him seemed to guide him to a deeper understanding of justice, rebellion, and redemption. The heavens remained imposing and silent, as if they held secrets that were not yet ready to be revealed. Enoch, however, continued his journey, knowing that each step he took brought him closer to the purpose for which he had been chosen. Enoch was led to visions that went beyond the present. He was transported to a distant future, where he witnessed the final destiny of all creation. Before his eyes, a majestic and terrible scene was unfolding, the final judgment, where every being would be confronted with their actions. There was a clear separation between the righteous and the wicked. The vision revealed a place of rest reserved for those who lived righteously. This place emanated a serene light, a haven of peace and comfort. The righteous flourished there, their souls shining with the glory of an eternal purpose. It was an image of hope, like the garden untouched by corruption that Enoch had witnessed before. On the other hand, there was a place of deep darkness where the wicked were confined. There was no peace there, only torment and delayed repentance. Enoch watched in silence, realizing that these prisons were not just punishments, but reflections of the choices made by those who had defied divine laws. As he contemplated these places, Enoch was filled with a sense of reverence and responsibility. He knew he needed to record these sights so that future generations would understand the weight of their choices. What he saw was not just an end, but a reminder that every decision shaped eternal destiny. The visions also showed the righteous being rewarded in a great way. Not only did they inhabit a place of peace, but they were also elevated to a state of glory that transcended earthly understanding. It was as if goodness and obedience had become a living force, shining brighter than any natural light. At the same time, the wicked faced the consequences of their rebellion. Their actions, once hidden or ignored, were now exposed. There was no escaping the truth that surrounded them. Justice was immutable, and Enoch felt the gravity of this reality. He knew that the final judgment was both a promise and a warning. Enoch was also led to witness the heavenly records. Books containing the deeds of all beings lay open before him. Every detail of an individual's life was recorded there, as if nothing escaped divine observation. He understood that everything was connected and that creation followed a greater plan. These revelations were not easy to absorb. Enoch felt the weight of responsibility to share what he had seen. Humanity needed to know that their actions had consequences, not just in this life, but in eternity. He knew that these truths would not be easy to accept, but they were necessary. Even in the face of such clarity, Enoch's visions continued to raise more questions. He couldn't help but reflect on the balance between justice and mercy. While the righteous found rest and the wicked faced damnation, he realized that each had been treated with absolute fairness. The final scenes of these judgments, no doubt. The fate of the righteous and the wicked was sealed, but what Enoch saw was also a call for those still living to choose wisely. He knew that his mission didn't end there, for the next revelations would bring even more answers about the mysteries of the universe. Enoch was transported to new visions, where the mysteries of the universe began to unfold before his eyes. He saw the heavens in motion, like a great divine mechanism, each part working in perfect harmony. The stars, the winds, the rain, and the seasons followed a rhythm that transcended human comprehension, revealing the balance of creation. The heavenly angels explained that everything in the cosmos had a purpose and an order. The stars, which to many only seemed like dots in the sky, played a fundamental role in maintaining this balance. Enoch watched, fascinated, as he learned that their movements were not random, but carefully orchestrated by invisible laws. The seasons also carried deep meaning. The cycle of life on Earth depended on this synchrony, and each season carried with it a unique message. The winds, which seemed unpredictable to human eyes, had determined trajectories, and even the rain was part of a system that reflected divine wisdom. As he absorbed these revelations, Enoch realized that the balance of the universe was not only physical, but also spiritual. What happened in the heavens had direct repercussions on earth, and vice versa. The angels explained that harmony was only possible when each element fulfilled its purpose without deviating from its function. Faced with the immensity of the cosmos, Enoch felt his humanity with overwhelming force. Every movement of the stars and winds seemed to contain a greater message, as if the Creator had signed every detail of creation. He wondered, how could someone so small carry such a great role? This mixture of fascination and humility left him speechless. However, Enoch also saw the impact of disobedience. The rebellion of the fallen angels had caused disruptions in this perfect balance. Creation, which had once been a pure reflection of God's will, now bore the marks of disorder. He understood that corruption was not limited to the earth, but reached much greater dimensions. The visions showed that, even in the midst of disorder, the Creator maintained absolute control. The laws that governed the universe could not be destroyed, only momentarily unbalanced. It was as if every movement of the cosmos was a dance that, despite external interference, always returned to its original melody. Enoch was led to observe phenomena that were incomprehensible to him before this journey. The brightness of the stars, the winds that crossed the sky, and even the cycle of the rain now had a much deeper meaning. He saw creation with new eyes, recognizing the hand of the Creator in every detail. These revelations not only broadened his understanding, but also strengthened his faith. Enoch understood that the divine order was unbreakable, and that even in times of chaos, there was a greater plan at work. He felt a deep peace, knowing that nothing was out of his control. However, the learning journey was not yet over. The visions continued to unfold, and Enoch knew that each new revelation brought him closer to the truth. He was only just beginning to understand the vast scope of the divine mysteries and his role as a messenger of these truths. Enoch was led to a vision of majesty and power that left him in awe. At the center of this revelation, he saw the figure of the Son of Man, radiant as no earthly light could describe. He emanated unquestionable authority, and his presence seemed to fill the entire universe. The angels at Enoch's side explained that this was the divine judge, the one who would bring justice and redemption. The Son of Man was presented as the one who would be the light for the elect. His glory would illuminate the paths of the righteous, guiding them to a future of hope. Enoch watched the chosen ones around him, and their souls shone in harmony with the divine presence. The justice he represented not only righted wrongs, but also restored all that had been lost. At the same time, his authority brought destruction to sinners. The vision showed the impact of his judgment on those who had chosen the path of rebellion. The forces of evil, which had once seemed invincible, were now reduced to nothing before his presence. The Son of Man was not just a judge, he was the symbol of triumphant righteousness. Enoch was made to witness the impact of his arrival on earth. The wicked, who had once acted with impunity, now trembled at the unparalleled power they saw before them. The sight left no doubt. Evil had no place in the new order that was being established. It was the end of the corruption that had contaminated creation. The righteous, on the other hand, found in him the fulfillment of all the divine promises. The peace they were granted was not only external, but also internal. Their souls were finally free from the marks of suffering and injustice. The Son of Man, with his compassionate gaze, welcomed them as heirs to a new era. The visions showed that the Son of Man not only brought judgment, but also reconciliation. He was the bridge between heaven and earth, uniting what had been separated by rebellion. Enoch understood that his coming was the culmination of a plan that transcended time, bringing order to all that had been distorted. The power that emanated from him was unquestionable, but his presence also conveyed peace and security. Enoch felt a deep sense of relief as he witnessed this restoration. He realized that, Even in the midst of the destruction necessary to eliminate evil, there was an indescribable beauty in the renewal that was taking place. The visions also revealed that the Son of Man would be the center of all creation. His light radiated to the four corners of the universe, touching everything and everyone. He was not just a judge, he was the beating heart of the cosmos, the source of all life and purpose. Nothing existed outside his influence. Enoch knew that these revelations needed to be shared. What he had seen was not just a judgment, but the realization of a promise that transcended the ages. The Son of Man was the hope of the righteous and the end of the power of the wicked, bringing with him the restoration of all that had been lost. The visions led Enoch to a moment of renewal. He witnessed the complete transformation of the world, as if creation had been rewritten. The chaos and destruction that had previously reigned were replaced by a profound peace, where the light of righteousness shone brightly. The planet, which had been scarred by corruption, now flourished with renewed vitality. The righteous, who had persevered amid adversity, received a reward beyond all expectation. Enoch saw them inhabiting a world where there was no more suffering, and their souls radiated a serenity that reflected the glory of the Creator. It was as if every tear they shed had been transformed into a river of eternal joy. The wicked, on the other hand, had been completely removed. Their absence brought an indescribable harmony to the universe, as if creation was finally breathing a sigh of relief. Enoch understood that this was not only an act of judgment, but also an act of love. Evil had been banished forever, and goodness reigned unhindered. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has impacted you as much as it has me. So, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave your like to support our work, and keep exploring mysteries like this. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your participation makes all the difference. The renewed world seemed to be in perfect communion with the heavens. The stars, winds, and waters danced in sync, like a divine melody that enveloped all of creation. Every element, no matter how small, seemed to fulfill its purpose perfectly, reflecting the order that the Creator had planned from the beginning. Enoch realized that this transformation was not only external. The hearts of the righteous had also been purified. They no longer bore the marks of the past, but lived in complete freedom, free from the weight of sin and the shadows that had previously haunted them. It was a new existence where life was experienced in its purest form. The visions showed that the light of righteousness had triumphed over darkness. It wasn't just a passing victory, but an eternal triumph. Goodness and justice had become the pillars of the new world, and nothing could shake that foundation. It was a living testimony to the power of the Creator and the greatness of His work. As he watched, Enoch was filled with a sense of gratitude. He understood that, despite all the suffering and destruction, the Creator's plan had been fulfilled. Evil had no place in this new world, and creation finally reflected the glory for which it had been intended. The Archangels who had taken part in the judgment were now at rest. Their tasks had been completed, and they looked on with reverence at the new creation. It was as if heaven and earth were in perfect harmony, united by a common purpose. The separation that once existed had been undone. As he gazed at the renewed creation, Enoch was filled with a deep sense of relief. It was as if the weight of visions, judgments, and corruption had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He felt an indescribable peace, not just from witnessing divine justice, but from understanding that all the suffering had culminated in something so glorious. Enoch knew that what he was seeing was a glimpse of what was to come, a promise that would bring hope to all who chose the path of righteousness. He also knew that his mission was not yet over. The revelations he had received needed to be shared so that the world would understand what was at stake. As the visions faded, Enoch felt that he had witnessed something that no other man had ever seen. He knew that what was recorded in his spirit was precious, and that his role as a messenger was more important than ever. Enoch was made to understand the scale of the heavenly rebellion in a surprising way. It was not a small, isolated insubordination, but a grand and meticulously orchestrated event. Exactly 200 angels, each with a unique and vital role in the balance of the heavens, joined together in a pact that directly challenged the authority of the Creator. This pact, signed on Mount Hermon, was a symbol of their deliberate decision to abandon their heavenly responsibilities. The exact number of 200 was no accident. It represented the precise organization of a large-scale rebellion, which contrasted with the harmony and order that had been characteristic of heaven until then. Each of these angels had a specific function in maintaining the cosmos, whether it was overseeing the stars, the cycles of the seasons, or protecting creation. When they abandoned their posts, they left gaps that created an instant cosmic imbalance. The decision to rebel was not an impulsive act, but the result of long deliberations among the angels, led by Semjaza. He, who was one of the most respected and powerful, used his influence to convince the others to follow his plan. However, the strength of the decision lay not only in his persuasion, but in the promise that everyone would share the consequences equally. When they sealed the pact on Mount Hermon, each angel swore not to turn back, regardless of the outcome. It was an act of collective defiance, not just against the Creator, but against the divine order that sustained the entire universe. Mount Hermon, chosen as the site of the covenant, became a dark symbol of this transgression. Once a place of peace and reverence, it was transformed into a landmark of rebellion. There, with solemn and decisive words, the angels swore to break the separation between heaven and earth. Not content with contemplating creation from a distance, they decided to take for themselves what had not been granted to them: human wives and the right to interfere directly in earthly affairs. Their rebellion profoundly upset the divine balance. Each of these 200 angels was a fundamental part of the celestial order, and their absence left the cosmos vulnerable to disordered influences. The system created to sustain life and maintain harmony began to face challenges, with the heavens and the earth feeling the repercussions of the absence of these guardians. It was as if the universe, once functioning as a perfect machine, had lost essential components, generating a domino effect of chaos and disorder. The celestial rebellion also had spiritual and emotional implications for heaven. The angels who remained faithful watched with regret as their companions abandoned their glory and purpose. The impact was felt as a wound that spanned eternity, a pain not only for the faithful angels, but also for the creation that depended on the balance sustained by them. It was more than a breach of rules. It was a rupture that echoed in every corner of the cosmos. For Enoch, understanding this rebellion in its entirety was a shock. He saw that the decision of the 200 angels not only defied the Creator, but also jeopardized the entire structure of existence. He began to realize that this fall was not just an isolated event, but the beginning of a cycle of consequences that would reverberate throughout human and heavenly generations. These angels, in their rebellion, introduced giants to earth whose existence defied all notions of balance and order. These beings, described as being thousands of feet tall, were living monuments to the transgression of the fallen angels. Their colossal proportions were not only physical, but also symbolic, representing the weight of the corruption that now dominated the world. The presence of the giants brought unimaginable chaos. Their hunger was insatiable, and they consumed natural resources in frightening proportions, devastating entire crops in a matter of days. What was once enough to sustain human villages for months was swallowed up by these beings in the blink of an eye. The humans, who were already suffering the consequences of the forbidden knowledge passed on by the angels, now faced a physical threat that seemed insurmountable. Not satisfied with natural resources, the giants turned their attention to animals. Entire species were hunted to extinction, while the Earth's ecological balance rapidly deteriorated. But the real horror came when the giants, consumed by their instinctive violence, began to attack humans themselves. Their actions spread terror wherever they went, turning entire communities into fields of desolation. The earth seemed small in the face of these unconscionable beings. Their footprints marked the ground like craters, reminders of their destructive passage. Mountains trembled with their movements, Rivers were diverted by their thirst, and forests were reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. Every action of the giants seemed like a direct affront to divine creation, as if their existence was a physical manifestation of the rebellion of fallen angels. These giants were not only insatiable predators, but also catalysts for violence. Between themselves, territorial disputes turned into battles that devastated everything around them. When these titans clashed, the impact was felt for miles, with the ground shaking and destruction spreading in all directions. It was as if their nature was programmed to destabilize the world. The chaos introduced by the giants was not limited to their era. Their actions left their mark across generations. The humans who survived their presence passed on stories of terror and destruction that would echo in collective memories for centuries. Places that had been razed to the ground by them became synonymous with ruin, and the civilizations that arose subsequently had to rebuild their lives on the scars left by these colossal beings. In addition to the physical impact, the giants also represented a spiritual challenge. Their existence was a constant reminder of the rebellion of the fallen angels and the price of disobedience. They were not only giants in size, but also in symbolism, encapsulating the magnitude of the consequences of deviating from the divine purpose. The presence of the giants on Earth was like a living reminder that creation, when corrupted, could become unrecognizable. Their magnitude, violence, and insatiability transformed the world into a landscape of desolation, where what was once beautiful and harmonious was now a battleground for survival. Every step they took was a mark that humanity could never forget. But divine justice was clear. The fallen angels would be imprisoned for 70 generations, awaiting the final judgment. This sentence was not just a punishment, but a demonstration of the Creator's patience and precision. 70 generations, a vast period to human eyes, represented a set time for the divine plan to be fulfilled in its entirety. This waiting was not a postponement of judgment, but part of a larger process where justice and mercy coexisted perfectly. The angels were imprisoned in dark abysses, confined in a state of absolute isolation. These places, described as impenetrable depths, were spaces where time seemed not to exist, and silence weighed like an eternal condemnation. There, these once brilliant beings reflected on their choices, surrounded by shadows that symbolized their own transgressions. For Enoch, the period of 70 generations was not just a count of years, but a testimony to divine patience. It was an interval that allowed humanity time to seek redemption, while the fallen angels remained a living example of the consequences of rebellion. The Creator did not act with haste, but with precision, allowing all things to happen in their due time. This period also represented a chance for humanity to reflect on the marks left by the fallen angels. Their actions continued to echo, and the forbidden knowledge they had passed on shaped cultures and practices that strayed from the divine purpose. Succeeding generations carried the traces of these influences, while the world awaited the final fulfillment of justice. The confinement of the angels was not only a way of stopping them, but also a preparation for the final judgment. They waited helplessly as time took its course. Each generation that passed brought humanity closer to that decisive moment when all things would be put in order again. This interval of 70 generations was also a reminder that the Creator was in absolute control. Even the fallen angels, with all the power they possessed, could not escape the divine decree. Their rebellion had been great, but the justice that awaited them was even greater. Time, which seemed endless to them, was a tool of the Creator, used to fulfill His purpose with perfection. Enoch realized that waiting was not a weakness, but a demonstration of divine sovereignty. Each moment had a meaning, and each generation that passed accumulated the consequences of the choices made by those who had disobeyed. Divine justice was not hasty, but certain, inevitable, and absolute. Furthermore, the revelations showed the extent of the forbidden knowledge that the angels brought to humanity. Each teaching, although initially received as a gift, carried within it the weight of disobedience and corruption. They taught astrology, allowing humans to read the movements of the stars and try to predict future events. What seemed like a key to unlocking the mysteries of the cosmos soon became an instrument to divert man from his faith, leading him to trust the constellations more than the Creator. The manipulation of metals was another shared secret, and its consequences were even more devastating. Before, men used the Earth's resources in harmony, but with the new knowledge, weapons of war and tools that would be used for mass destruction emerged. Tribes and communities that had previously lived together in peace began to divide and fight each other, driven by ambition and violence, both fueled by the skills they received. Sorcery, perhaps the most dangerous of the arts taught, opened doors to dark practices and rituals that invoked unknown forces. Men and women, fascinated by the power these practices promised, plunged into a world of deception, where the illusion of control over the spiritual led them further away from the divine purpose. These rituals often involved sacrifices and acts that distorted the sanctity of life, creating a cycle of darkness that spanned generations. The fallen angels also taught smaller, but equally dangerous secrets. They revealed how to create cosmetics to manipulate appearance and how to use herbs in ways that could deceive and control others. Knowledge about poisons and antidotes, which should be used to heal, was twisted to bring suffering and destruction. Each teaching was like a weapon handed to a humanity that was not yet prepared to deal with such responsibility. The spiritual impact of this knowledge was devastating. What initially seemed like wisdom brought pride and arrogance into the human heart. Men began to see themselves as equal or even superior to the Creator, believing that they could dominate the world and shape it according to their will. This spiritual rebellion not only distanced humanity from God, but also fueled the cycle of sin and suffering that would dominate the world. Enoch realized that each teaching was a seed of rebellion planted in the human heart. As these seeds grew, they bore bitter fruit that poisoned not only individuals, but entire communities. Knowledge, which was supposed to be a tool to glorify divine creation, became an instrument of destruction, transforming harmony into chaos. The consequences of this knowledge were not restricted to the time when the fallen angels walked among men. Their teachings echoed down the generations, shaping cultures and civilizations. The spiritual corruption they introduced would continue to influence humanity for centuries, leaving deep scars in the relationship between man and the Creator. This dark legacy of the fallen angels served as a reminder to Enoch that true knowledge does not lie in skills or practices, but in the connection with the divine. What the angels brought to humanity was not wisdom, but a burden which would carry consequences for eons. Humanity, fascinated by the false glow of these secrets, didn't realize that it was moving away from its greater purpose. Enoch, as mediator, was a reflection of deep themes of redemption and judgment. He represented the hope of interceding for the fallen, but also the certainty that divine justice would prevail. His position between heaven and earth showed that, even in the midst of chaos, there was a divine order being fulfilled. The visions also revealed a panorama of the cosmos, where every star and every movement of the winds had a purpose. The celestial order reflected divine justice, demonstrating that the Creator not only judged, but also restored the balance of His creation. The entire universe seemed aligned with His will, even in the moments of greatest turmoil. These revelations were not just warnings. What did it mean, after all, for humanity to have received this forbidden knowledge? Enoch wondered how men could overcome the marks left by these transgressions. Was it possible to rebuild the relationship with the Creator and re-establish the lost harmony? Every detail of the visions raised questions that challenged human understanding. For Enoch, these visions were not just static images, but windows into a complexity that transcended earthly understanding. He was confronted by enigmas that seemed beyond the reach of human reason, mysteries so profound that only the Creator could fully unveil them. Each scene, each event revealed in the visions, left a trail of questions echoing in his mind. What was the true purpose of the fallen angels? This question reverberated in his heart. Why had beings endowed with such wisdom, created to reflect divine glory, chosen to rebel? Was it just pride and desire that drove them, or was there something deeper? Could it be that their fall also played a part in a greater, mysterious and hidden plan? Enoch knew that this answer was beyond him, but he couldn't help contemplating the invisible threads that linked these choices to the fate of all creation. Why had God allowed their rebellion to manifest itself in this way? This was an even more disturbing question. The Creator, who possessed absolute power, could have prevented the rebellion. He could have prevented the angels from descending to earth, from interfering in men's lives, and from bringing forbidden knowledge. However, he allowed everything to happen. Enoch understood that divine permission was not synonymous with approval, but the reason remained a mystery. What did the Creator want to teach humanity by allowing them to experience the consequences of such corruption? As he reflected, Enoch realized that free will was a central element in this whole story. Both angels and men had the power to choose. What the fallen angels did was exercise their freedom, even if it meant rejecting the divine order. But the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, transformed even acts of rebellion into opportunities to demonstrate his justice and mercy. Was this the ultimate purpose behind the fall? To show creation that, even in the face of chaos, divine order would prevail. The questions that arose in his mind went beyond simple curiosity. They touched on universal questions about good and evil, freedom and consequence, justice and grace. Enoch began to realize that the answers to these questions were not meant to be fully understood. They were part of a plan that went beyond time, something that only the Creator could encompass in its entirety. As he immersed himself in these reflections, Enoch felt the weight of the paradox of creation. The beauty of free will lay in the ability to choose, love, and obey the Creator voluntarily. But this freedom also brought the possibility of rebellion, of distorting the divine purpose. However, even when wrong choices were made, the Creator used these situations to shape history according to his sovereign will. Enoch understood that the purpose of the fallen angels and the impact of their actions could not be judged with human eyes alone. For him, the visions showed that the universe was not governed by chance, but by an infinite wisdom that wove every event towards a greater destiny. The rebellion of the angels was terrible, but it was also a reflection of the complexity of a plan that balanced justice, redemption, and freedom. These reflections brought Enoch a mixture of fascination and humility. He realized that he didn't need to fully understand the Creator's plan in order to trust it. Each unanswered question was, in fact, an invitation to trust in divine wisdom, even when the paths seemed dark. It was as if the Creator himself was saying, "Observe, but also trust." The impact of these reflections was not limited to Enoch. He knew that by recording these visions, he would pass on to humanity the same questions and concerns that now moved him. It was not his role to answer all the questions, but to present them as a reminder that there is something greater, something that transcends human understanding. Enoch recognized that his mission was not only to reveal truths, but also to inspire the search for meaning, even in uncertainty. The questions that arose in the visions were not barriers, but bridges. They linked the visible world to the invisible, the temporal to the eternal. Enoch understood that these questions challenged human understanding for a reason, to show that, ultimately, the Creator is the only one who has all the answers. And it was in this trust that he found peace, even in the face of such profound mysteries. Enoch's final visions were a hymn to the glorification of the Creator. He saw the heavens open up in a spectacle of light, where countless angels worshipped in perfect harmony. Their voices echoed in an indescribable melody, each note exalting the majesty and power of the one who had created and renewed all things. The whole universe seemed to bow before the divine presence. Enoch contemplated the righteous inheriting the earth in its fullness. Each of them walked with a radiant glow, a reflection of the divine glory that now dwelt in them. Creation, finally in perfect harmony, seemed to pulsate with a new energy, as if it were a world born again, free from all the corruption that had previously marked it. The wicked, on the other hand, faced the final fate that had been reserved for them. Confined in a place of impenetrable darkness, they were far from any light or hope. It was a fate that reflected their choices, an eternal separation from the Creator and all that was pure and true. Their voices, now silent, were an echo of what they had lost. Enoch realized that the trial was not only about punishment, but also about confirming the divine plan. Every event he had witnessed, from the rebellion of the angels to the renewal of the earth, was part of a greater purpose. Not a single detail had escaped the sovereignty of the Creator. The revelations led him to understand the greatness of the balance between justice and mercy. Evil had been extirpated forever, but the righteous experienced a love so profound that it transcended human understanding. The earth, now glorified, was a perfect reflection of heaven, a union that no power could break. Enoch saw the Creator at the center of everything, surrounded by a light that no mortal gaze could bear. He was the source of all life, of all goodness, of all truth. Every fiber of the universe seemed to exist to proclaim His glory. Enoch felt that he was standing before something so vast and infinite that there were no words to describe it. He also saw the confirmation of the divine plan as a finished work. Time and eternity were intertwined, and the past, present, and future seemed to converge in a single moment of exaltation to the Creator. It was as if all of creation was finally at peace, resting in the certainty that everything was as it should be. Enoch knew he needed to record everything he had seen. His words would be a testimony to those who would come after him, a reminder of the Creator's power and love. He felt that his mission was coming to an end, but his legacy was just beginning. The revelations he received would be passed down through the generations. As the visions began to fade, Enoch looked around him and realized that he had witnessed something that no other man had ever experienced. He had walked among the angels, seen the heavens, and received secrets that would shape humanity's understanding of the divine. His journey, although extraordinary, was only one part of the eternal plan. With a heart full of reverence, Enoch knew that the Creator had shown him not only the fate of the earth, but also the glory of a future where evil would be just a distant memory. It was the beginning of an eternal kingdom, where the light would never be extinguished and creation would flourish forever. Enoch's story can be used to reflect on divine justice, corruption, and redemption. Are we ready to face the consequences of our choices? By witnessing the fall of the angels, the suffering of humanity, and the renewal of creation, we realize how powerful the balance between justice and mercy is. Do you think evil has really been vanquished, or that we still face remnants of this battle in our world? If you were moved by this story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue exploring deep mysteries like this one. Leave a like and share with anyone you think also needs to hear these truths. And finally, comment, "I choose the light," to show that you've stayed to the end and understood the message.